Hello, everybody, and a really warm welcome to this afternoon's launch of a new report. The report's entitled The Digital Divide, the Impact on the Rights of Care Leavers in Scotland. My name is Penny Taylor. I am a journalist. I've specialised in health and social care for longer than I care to confess to. And it's my very great pleasure to be here facilitating these discussions on bridging the digital divide for care experienced young people. As I said, this is the launch of this latest piece of research. Then we have a wonderful lineup of people for you who are going to give you an introduction to what their role is, and then we really want the delegates, the people that are joining this conversation, to be asking the questions that you'd like to put to the folk that we've got for you. So there's a chat function you will see. And if you were to go into that chat function, you can type your questions or your comments or pretty much anything you want to say in there. But if you want to direct your question to a particular speaker, please indicate that for me. And we may also want, if you're willing, to come to you directly for delegates to put their questions themselves. So our challenge here is to take up the challenge of how do we make the case for digital inclusion for care experienced young people in Scotland. Before we do that, I would very much like to introduce, please, the researchers who are Kenny McGee of CELCIS and Autumn Roche Marsh of the University of Edinburgh. Welcome. Would you take it away, guys?
Okay, are we ready to go, Julian?
Yes.
We are. Did you want to say anything?
Wants to play the videos.
The video.
We have a video to play first. There's an explanatory video, and then we'll pick up with Kenny and Autumn after that.
The COVID-19 pandemic has brought into sharp focus many inequalities that persist in our society. As the way we communicate, learn, work, and access services has changed, some have been left disconnected. Digital exclusion refers to a lack of access to the digital world and to the opportunities it provides for everything from job seeking to socialising to accessing local services. Digital inclusion requires functional, up-to-date devices that meet the needs of the user, affordable and reliable broadband service, and the skills to successfully navigate the digital world. These three elements can be referred to as kit, connection, and confidence. Poverty is a serious contributor to digital exclusion. It's the biggest factor, apart from age, in determining whether or not someone has consistent access to the kit, connection, and confidence necessary for inclusion in a digital society. Most care-experienced young people struggle with limited incomes and many live in poverty. This has caused care leavers to be overrepresented among digitally excluded young people in Scotland. The impact of digital exclusion can worsen other challenges disproportionately faced by care leavers, such as social isolation and opportunities for work and learning. Care leavers who are struggling financially may find it hard to afford devices such as laptops or smartphones. Those living alone often cannot access broadband service, either due to the direct costs or because of an inability to commit to contracts. In pre-COVID times, young people could manage some of these difficulties by accessing public Wi-Fi hotspots or using computers in public places like libraries and youth centres. Reduced access to these services under pandemic restrictions has worsened the impact of digital exclusion for many. While the practical issues of digital exclusion for things like education and job seeking are important, it may be the less visible impacts on mental health and well-being which are more significant. The COVID lockdown has seen a rise in social isolation and increased the importance of digital platforms like Facebook, Snapchat and Zoom for engaging with friends, family and community. Even before the pandemic began, care leavers experienced disproportionate levels of social isolation. The risk of serious well-being impacts from this isolation has been compounded in lockdown for those unable to access the digital social platforms that have served as lifelines for others. Local authorities across Scotland have reported increased incidents of loneliness, depression and self-harm among care leavers during the pandemic. Digital exclusion also poses a challenge for young people in accessing their rights. Formal processes like looked after reviews, pathways reviews and children's hearings have moved wholly or partially online in 2020. This raises fundamental rights issues for many young people who may be unable to fully participate in processes that involve life-changing legal decisions, processes that are already mentally and emotionally challenging to navigate. The Scottish Government has committed to incorporating the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child into Scots law in 2021. The UNCRC requires that care-experienced young people be given special assistance and protection to enable their participation. Although COVID-19 has made many aspects of digital exclusion more serious, bringing the pandemic under control will not negate Scotland's responsibility to make sure care-experienced young people are not left out of our increasingly digital society. Based on what the pandemic has shown us about the impact of digital exclusion for care leavers in Scotland, it's clear that digital access is a rights issue that goes to the heart of participation, health and well-being, and the use of services. Policy, planning, and individual support needs to incorporate an assumption of entitlement to the kit, connection, and confidence necessary for everyone to have full access.
Thank you very much. Lovely film. Now, I'd like to introduce, please, Kenny McGee of CELCIS and Autumn Roche-Marsh of the University of Edinburgh.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us today and sharing this opportunity with us to share our findings of our research report. What we're going to do is we're going to tag team this. I'm going to start off and I'm just going to kind of follow in behind, and we're going to share a brief overview of our research findings, some of the key issues and some of the recommendations that we're making. I'm going to start off by offering some background and context to our paper and why we think these issues are particularly important. We're both grateful for the work of our colleague Dr. Fern Gillen for her work in the data collection, and to Rosie Moore, our participation worker at CELCIS, who supported and facilitated our focus group. So slide 2, please, Julian. Okay, so what we know is the impact of COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated and amplified the precarious of many care leaver situations. It's exposed, highlighted much of the pre-existing structural disadvantage and discrimination that they often face, and this has impacted on their access and the rights to access to services, supports and provisions. However, one of the more positive observations in many ways, particularly in the early stages of the pandemic, has been the reports of increased worker autonomy, devolved decision making into frontline and operational practice, removing some of the bureaucratic processes and obstacles, and enabling staff to be much more responsive and proactive in responding to the issues and supporting care leavers' needs. And this in itself included buying or providing smartphones and laptops, providing and loading SIM cards and ensuring data, and also connecting with young people via everyday social media platforms that were previously taboo or blocked by corporate IT policies. The focus on the absolute importance of ensuring connection to support mental health and emotional wellbeing issues. Staff were able to set aside and in some cases circumvent some of the petty arguments and obstacles which have previously been reported as to get in the way of connection by both workers and young people. However, despite many of the localised positive responses to both individual circumstances and the broader population, and as welcoming as necessary these are, what they've often done is exposed and exacerbated inconsistencies in postcode lottery provisions already abound. Slide 3, please, Joanne. Next slide. So in July 2020, Autumn and I published our informed briefing called Bridging the Digital Divide for Scotland's Care Waivers, If Not Now, When? And this was based on a survey of local authority care leads through care and after care leads, along with data collected and collated from our community practice forums between March and July last year. The paper highlighted many of the issues facing care experienced young people in relation to digital exclusion and the profound impact that this had on their lives. Education, employment, finances, banking benefits, health advice and support, access to everyday services which most of us now take for granted are now often only accessible online. And the vital importance of social connection, maintaining relationships with friends and family, and for recreation, simply keeping in touch or binging on Netflix to get us through, as we've all endured months of lockdown restrictions. These apply for everybody. And they're only accessible if you've got the connection and the confidence to access them. So on slide 4, that's excellent. The overwhelming views expressed by through care and after care leads identified the fundamental need for care experienced young people to have secure, reliable and sustainable digital connection. One of the quotes was, "It's absolutely critical to modern living. Claiming benefits, applying to colleges or for jobs, paying bills, banking and everything is online, and it's massively important, and it's even more so during lockdown." As we've said, the pandemic exposed the fragility of many situations, exposing a seismic rift in access to basic services and supports, and the opportunity to simply connect, to counter the deeply damaging impact of isolation, exclusion and loneliness. Next slide, please. So we concluded by making a number of recommendations, not least that digital inclusion and digital connection should be regarded as a right, a fundamental right, and a utility in the same way that electricity and water is, and that any tool or medium that enables or supports the development and maintenance of positive social relationships and connections for care experienced young people must be regarded as a fundamental necessity, and that the principal assumption the assumption of entitlement principle as outlined in the Scottish Care Waivers Covenant must apply here. Corporate parents need to work together to bring about a more consistent and equitable solution to ensure that all care experienced young people to whom the state particularly has corporate parent responsibilities have the necessary confidence and connection to be fully included. These issues were apparent pre-pandemic, and they've now taken on a much greater importance, which Autumn will now cover. Autumn.
Yeah, next slide. So, as Kenny just said, we spoke to local authorities and frontline staff, and that was really useful, but we were really aware that we hadn't spoken to young people themselves about their own experience. So this most recent piece of research is us trying to hear what it was like from young people themselves firsthand. And you'll appreciate that this was actually quite difficult, because how do you research digital exclusion with people who can only access your study via a smartphone or a tablet or a computer? So we have to acknowledge that the sample, one, it's fairly small, but also that it's likely to be people who were more digitally included that were able to respond to the survey. So I think there's a big issue here, and it's across social science research with all sorts of groups at the moment that are even harder to reach than normal. And so we need to really think about how we connect with those groups and make sure we're telling their stories and hearing their voices. So we did a survey, an online survey, and we managed to get 24 care leavers, and thanks to all the partner agencies, staff, Life Changes Trust for promoting the survey. Actually, we were quite pleased at those numbers. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but the young people who responded were between the ages of 15 and 29. The majority were female, and we know that young women tend to be more likely to fill in surveys. We know that across social science research. That's a different seminar. We could talk about that sometime, but we won't talk about it now. And we collected information in that survey about their access to data and to tech, and how the pandemic had impacted on that access. And we asked them where they were from and things like that, where in Scotland. So we were able to collect some information from across most of Scotland, albeit, you know, limited numbers. And then, as Kenny said, Rosie Moore facilitated a focus group with 4 young people. They were all women who spoke in depth about the impact of digital exclusion and inclusion on their life. And so this report represents a collation of both those, the survey data and the focus group. So could I have the next slide, please? So I guess one of the key messages that came out of the research is how important digital connection is to young people. And some of these quotes really capture that quite powerfully. My phone is the most important thing in my life. It's my world. And we heard at the beginning about how everything we do now requires access to the online world. So it's not surprising that care experienced young people feel that too. I know I have a panic when I lose my phone or I can't find it. You know, we're all so dependent now, and ever more so when we can't physically see each other as much. Another quote here: it can be so isolating if you can't get in touch with anyone you know. And we know the mental health impacts of COVID have been extremely hard on young people in particular. So if you imagine, if you're a young person whose maybe family networks aren't that strong, you're locked down, you can't see people, and you can't connect to your friends and other networks online. That must be terrifying and really, really difficult experience. And that's what the young people spoke about. I'm a care leaver and a single parent. The biggest barrier was having access to a laptop for my son's schoolwork. I was worried he would fall behind to a lack of resources. So we have to remember, care experienced people have children, they have jobs, they have all the things the rest of us have. And this is a vital service, as Kenny said at the beginning. Next slide. So the digital provided a lifeline, and there were some interesting comments about young people being able to access support a bit better now that they were able to do it online. So one person spoke about the first time I have access to counseling, which has been arranged online, and we meet virtually, which has been a huge help during COVID-19. Obviously, if you didn't have the device or that connection, you wouldn't have been able to do that. So it's really important to think about that. Even the food bank that I needed doorstep delivery from was arranged via the internet or WhatsApp. So we should see digital access as like a utility, but we have to recognize that we also access other utilities and essential services through that as well. Without online access, I would have nothing. Kind of sums it up quite clearly, doesn't it? Next slide, please. Also, a number of the young people were students, and they talked about the importance of being able to access their learning online. If they didn't have a device or the connectivity wasn't good, it made it very difficult to carry on with their studies. I would normally access the residential project where I can get Wi-Fi and a laptop, but due to the strict social distancing measures and the fact that the college is closed, I have no functional means of study and access, and I'm doing this purely by a small mobile phone. Young people's determination to continue to try to connect with their studies, even with these barriers, is really impressive, but it shouldn't be this difficult, and it's really quite shameful that some found it so difficult to carry on with their studies and even had to stop because of these issues. Next slide, please. So some key discussion points for us then. really, we really need to think about a culture change in social care for children and young people. We've got to recognize that digital rights are essential to health and well-being. They're essential to social connection. They're essential to improving outcomes. I can't access education. I can't get a job. I can't do any of the things I want to do if I don't have this connection. So in social work and social services, we have to recognize that and change our mindset around that. Secondly, we need to think about how IT and digital policies can be care-proofed and make sure that digital platforms are user-friendly to meet the needs of care-experienced young people. There's a lot of work going on by people like Sonia Livingston at LSE, looking at, how is the internet set up and how does it affect particular groups, and how can we better protect children and young people from a range of backgrounds when they're online. And that's the responsibility of adults and government to think about that, but we can't leave care experienced people out of that conversation. Corporate plans and parenting plans need to explicitly address these issues of connection and confidence that we've been talking about. And this is for young people, but it's also for staff. And that's one of the things that I think the pandemic has highlighted is in social work and social care, we're not always skilled up about how to use social media, about how to use the internet and online spaces effectively. And so it's been a huge learning curve for staff. And they're saying, we need more support with this. We need to be skilled up too to better support young people. So we need to think about both sides of the equation. And individual care and support plans should explicitly reference and address digital exclusion. So digital inclusion and exclusion. And again, one of the things that Sonia Livingston talks about is she talks about parenting for a digital future. And a caring parent recognizes that we live in a digital world and we will live in a digital future. We don't know what that digital future is going to be, but if you love your children, you want them to thrive in that world. So we as corporate parents need to think about how we're going to do that. And there's layers to it. So hopefully we can have a bit more of a conversation about that in a minute. Now I'm going to hand over to Kenny with the final thoughts on our final recommendations. Next slide, please.
Okay, thanks, Autumn. I mean, we're very clear of the view that digital connection and inclusion, it's got to be viewed through the kind of dual lenses of rights and participation and health and well-being. These things are wholly interconnected and wholly fundamental to improving outcomes into adulthood. We talk about closing the outcomes gap. We're never going to do that if we don't address this as a fundamental issue of connection. Many of us found the last year has been a really steep learning curve in terms of the use of new technologies. So we need to address the skills, knowledge and confidence gaps that also exist for workers supporting young people and working for making use of the technologies, keeping up to date. It's a rapidly evolving and developing area. It's unwise to assume that everybody has got the ability to navigate this with competence and confidence, given the speed of change. However, properly supporting our care experienced young people means properly supporting those who are closest to them as well. And finally, I think as we've contended, the issue of digital exclusion does not exist in a vacuum for Scotland's care experienced young people. It's interconnected and interrelated with many issues, not least the structural disadvantage, discrimination and underlying issues of poverty and financial precariousness and exclusion that exist. For digital poverty, read poverty in many instances. We hope that research acts as a clarion call for action to address this digital divide, but also serves as a prompt for the need for ongoing research into the interconnected and fundamental issues that continue to undermine care experienced young people's journey into adulthood and interdependence. And we really want to hear what people think and what their views are and how we can work together to make this happen. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we're all ears.
Thank you so much, Kenny and Autumn. It's a really important piece of work. But the response that we're going to get first, and arguably the most important perspective that there is, let me introduce Olivia Khan. Olivia is a care experienced young person. Olivia, give your response to what you've heard from Kenny and Autumn there.
Yes, I would love to. A lot of things popped up. I barely know where to start. I guess with what you just ended with, Kenny, I find really important. And I'll give an example from Berlin, where I'm based. When lockdown first happened, the German government offered a lot of support, almost the most support in Europe, apparently. And freelancers or people who were registered to work in Germany could apply for a really decent amount of money. So I did. And I went onto the website, which was given to me by my friends, and I had to wait in a long queue for a long time to leave my browser open to have good, stable internet connection. And I applied and I got the money, and I was able to, you know, survive off this for quite a while. And I kind of thought about all of my other freelance tech-focused friends who were using this site and who got the money and who were very excited. And then hours later, the money had run out. And I wondered about my neighbors with kids, if they would hear this news in time to be the first person to respond to get this money in their bank account. And it made me feel like there was a really big gap between the people who only had 12 hours to know that this existed, to answer their phones, to be able to have a good enough connection to wait for this in this queue. And I think that this whole weaving of poverty and inability to access stuff it's a bigger topic as well, and I think that's really important to consider. One thing I think that is also important, which is probably under the connection heading, is how young people are using the technology that they are using. Often I find myself having conversations with people that are very direct in language, using sentences like, how's your head? How does it feel to be you right now? And making it really easy for people to share when things, and I mean like family members checking up during lockdown. And one thing I can notice about people's language is what social media site they've been spending the most time scrolling on. You can hear the Facebook fake news article headlines in their language. And I say, why do you think that Mark Zuckerberg is a lizard? And there's no follow on, there's no education or knowledge behind it, it's just a headline. And that can be terrifying. The owner of Facebook is a lizard and no one knows, and how can I support, and should I delete Facebook? But no. And then there's like sexually explicit material, becoming addicted to that, getting pleasure immediately, you know, getting some form of connection through this. It's a massive problem, especially amongst young people who maybe haven't been you know, aren't super sexually mature and haven't been guided around this idea of this can be harmful. You know, watching this all day can affect you and how you see other people. And direct communication, I imagine if you looked in the conversations of a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 17-year-old, are they having real conversations with real people? Or is it, you know, hey, what's up? Nothing, what you doing? Can we, you know, encourage young people to ask questions, to connect in more meaningful ways?
Lovely stuff, Olivia. We'll pick up those points. But before we do that, I want to get quick reactions to this piece of research from our wonderful lineup of speakers. Then I want to open it to the delegates. Really, really, really want to hear your questions. So please use that. I think it's the chat function, Julian, rather than the questions function, is it? I'll get you an answer to that, but use either the chat or the questions function on the thingy on the right. We will get to it, I promise you, but we really want to involve you. Another point to make before we go much further is that this is being recorded. So make of that what you will, but it's worth knowing. Now, the next person I would very much like to go to is Sue Willing, who's Pathway Reviews Manager at Aberdeenshire Council. Hi, Sue.
Hi there, Penny. So, yes, I mean, I think maybe I should just say, but I'm a Pathways Review Manager with Aberdeenshire Council, but I'm also part of the Through Care Aftercare team in the council as well. And I think so much of what Kenny and Autumn's research has concluded just really, you know, reflects our young people's experiences, because I think in Aberdeenshire we have a large amount of rural areas, and we also have a few urban areas where there's quite a lot of poverty and so on as well. And I think when COVID arrived, it just felt to everyone as though they were virtually completely cut off. So that bit about sort of disconnection and needing to get back in touch with society over the internet and so on was really a prime focus for us when all of this happened. So we had a lot of young people who already had phones, but one of the things we first did was try and top up all their data packages and so on, so that they had immediate access to us and to other services, because obviously, as I think it was said, you know, medical services, job searching, DWP, all those things needed to be dealt with online. So it was really urgent that they could get in touch by phone, at least to start with. We then looked into a lot of young people's Wi-Fi packages within their accommodation, and we've tried to help them out with that sometimes, because that's obviously been a huge issue, especially for young people who are trying to carry on with their education from their own accommodation. And another thing that we have found really useful was a lot of young people, as again Kenny mentioned, I think, were trying to do their studies via a phone. Well, that was just really impossible for them. So we found the colleges were sometimes quite helpful with lending computers, but they didn't necessarily have laptops to give out. So we've also managed to access quite a lot of digital equipment through Connecting Scotland, who have been really helpful in providing laptops and iPads and so on, but also digital packages, which I did want to say is really handy, especially we have a couple of young people who actually at the moment aren't in permanent accommodation and have to move around. But with some of these things with the boxes, they can actually take with them, so that wherever they're staying, they can still access the internet, which is a huge bonus actually. So that's probably what I would
No,
say.
keep going. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's okay. I think that was probably my contribution in a nutshell. I think it was important for all of us to just really make sure that young people were connected as fast as possible, really, at a time when it felt like the world was almost coming to a standstill, really, for everybody. So
come back to whether that's a universal experience or whether Aberdeenshire Council's ahead of the game there. But let's hold on to that thought for a moment. And I'm just encouraging people, we've got some lovely questions in that question box. Please keep them coming. I promise you we will get to them. Now, I'd like to get a quick reaction next from Linda McLennan, Resource Manager for Corporate Parenting and Engagement at Highland Council.
Hi, thanks very much for inviting us along today. It's a really interesting subject. I just want to start off by saying that in Highland, and this will be the same for some other areas in Scotland, but less than 80% of Highland actually has a reasonable broadband connection, which is a huge issue. And like 3G and 4G is just simply not available in a huge amount of our area. So that's the sort of basis that our young people start from. And it has the impact in that actually young people are moving into more urban areas because they don't have broadband connections. So one of the big things just generally as a Highland thing that happened, and this isn't just for care experienced young people, it was for anybody who didn't have the wherewithal to get broadband or whatever, is that Highland Council have set up Nest Wi-Fi, which is 17 locations across Highland, particularly in rural areas. And it's very much about bridging the gap so that people can have a better connection with internet and connectivity. So there's 17 locations across Highland that have got that, and primarily rural, but saying that the whole of Inverness city is covered by that as well. And it's really fast, really good, easy to access Wi-Fi. And obviously once you get out to the edges of it, then it can be a bit of a problem. One of the things that we've done, particularly for care experienced young people, is that we've ensured that all of our care experienced young people have laptops, PCs, tablets, and we've funded it through our small grants scheme. Now that started off with part funding from Life Changes Trust and part funding from the Corporate Parenting Board. but we've continued that fund, and that is how lots of our young people get equipment. We've also used it as a means of actually getting out to see young people, so doing the doorstep visits and things like that, so we can hand the internet things over. Where we've got access, we provide top-up cards for contracts, finance to pay the increasing costs of internet through contracts when they've got that. We also are handing out dongles and basically any equipment that's needed. And we've been joined very closely with the local college, the University of the Highlands and Islands. They've been helping us provide all this information as well, and all the equipment. So the equipment part of it are young people, and we expect them to have more than a mobile phone, because there's just no way that young people can be doing their studying on a mobile phone. So we expect them to have either a tablet or a laptop. We linked in with one of our local suppliers, and he's actually helped us with really good equipment that we can then give to our young people. So that's been really positive to see. We're delivering loads of our things online, and all our equipment that goes out has all the apps on it, so that young people can really easily access them, so they know what tools that we've been using. And the thing that we're doing at the moment is we're starting to use virtual reality glasses to do mentoring and to do counselling and support using the virtual reality. So we've started doing a few of it, and it's really fun, but that's another way we're trying to deal with it. The bit we can't do is when there's no access, what do we do? Our young people are totally disadvantaged.
Thank you so much. Some really big challenges there. Some lovely comments and questions coming in on the question box. Let me go, please, if I may now, to Megan Perry, who's Team Leader for Integrated Children and Family Services at Aberdeen City Council. Welcome, Megan.
Hello, thank you. I've took a different slant, I guess. The two previous talkers had mentioned the actual connection, but something that I feel like we've done since COVID is personalize the way we connect with young people. So we're now doing that in a much more young person led way. So I feel like a lot in the past, without realizing, it was what suited the worker. It was well, they haven't answered my call, they haven't done X, they haven't done Y. Last March, we had 61 followers on our Facebook page, and we now have 310. So we have managed to increase that through connection, through personal videos, TikToks, anything that we feel would get that kind of personal connection with the young people that they felt like they were missing, and that's why they weren't investing into the page. So that's something that, of course, we need those devices, but actually we need to be connecting with young people in a way that suits them and not in a way that suits us. We also have an app in Aberdeen called Mind of My Own, which gathers young people's views through an app. So again, another way of connecting with the young people in a way that suits them. So they don't have to speak on the phone, they don't have to do that video call, because some of the young people aren't comfortable doing video calls. For us, sometimes it might be you do it to socialise, but actually when it's a really uncomfortable conversation, a video call is not something that they want to do. They can actually do it through this app. Like the others, we've been paired up with Connect in Scotland to get devices for our care leavers. And what we ensure is we want to be kind of socially close, even though we have to be physically distant. So yes, we have to be physically afar from you, but how can we connect with you in a way socially? Is that through WhatsApp? Is that through Facebook? And a quick thought on barriers is just that, for example, our young people said that Zoom was the way they felt most comfortable connecting, but our council blocks it. So, so we're in a situation we have to use our personal devices, like I am currently, because my council also blocks this, to connect with our young people. So that's one of the barriers that, how do we overcome those?
Really, it's a huge one. We'll come back to that. But I want to go now, please, if I may, to get a response from Mary Reid, who's Evidence and Influencing Coordinator at Life Changes Trust. Mary.
Thank you. Yeah, so the research really resonated with a lot of our learning, things that we've gathered over 8 years of funding experience, but it particularly resonated with an individual grants initiative that we co-produced with our advisory group early on in the first lockdown of last year. So the Keep Well Fund, as it's been mentioned a wee bit, offered up to £250 to young people with care experience to improve their physical and/or mental well-being at that point in time. And we knew that lockdown would deepen inequalities and exacerbate existing issues around things like poverty and digital access, also around well-being and loneliness. And the response that we received was really overwhelming, and the 690 odd awards that we made confirmed a lot of the stuff that we see in this research and the things that we already knew. So it was clear that technology and data poverty was very prevalent amongst young people with care experience, and actually over half of the grants that were made by the Trust supported the purchase of mobiles, laptops, games consoles and other forms of digital technology, either for connection or for entertainment. We could see from the young people's own words that the different ways that digital exclusion, or this digital divide that we're talking about today, had the power to stifle their potential and limit their quality of life, but it also prevented them just from accessing the very provision and systems that was supposed to be supporting them at this point in time. I think the other key thing, just from our perspective, is that the applications, what they did highlight was just the ongoing determination of young people to take control of their own circumstances. They know what their coping strategies are, and they know how to promote their own well-being. So we support the recommendations of the research, definitely, and we're committed to all efforts that would put young people at the heart of those potential solutions. So yes, it is a rights issue, but you also need to take a rights-based approach to actually developing those solutions too. And happy to talk more about that in the chat.
Thank you so much. I very much want to come back to this as a human right and how we enshrine it like that. I'd like to go now. We have here David McNeil, who's Digital Director at SCVO, and here talking for Connecting Scotland. David, has this been a particular challenge for Connecting Scotland? I mean, we're talking about supporting young people who are care leavers. You're on mute, mate.
I have to press 2 buttons to unmute myself. The digital director always gets technology wrong, doesn't he? Yeah, so Connecting Scotland kind of started kind of way back in kind of April last year when the pandemic hit. The Scottish Government recognised the big issues around digital exclusion. And the focus of the first phase was really on those clinically vulnerable, yes. So particularly the shielding group. And obviously, as that kind of program rolled out, there was, the issues around digital exclusion extended. There's so many other people that were affected by this, and care leavers became the into real focus for the government. So effectively, the second phase of Connecting Scotland focused on both families with children and young people leaving care. So to date, through that second phase of Connecting Scotland, we've awarded 203 projects or organisations a laptop or an iPad plus 24 months unlimited data through a mobile Wi-Fi to 3,708 care leavers. And there are more applications kind of being assessed just now, so that number will grow over the next kind of few weeks. So it's getting stuff out there. It's a kind of short-term kind of fix to actually a long-term challenge, and obviously won't reach everybody. But I think the research really does highlight some of those issues that have been known for quite a long time, that actually the digital and social exclusion are really closely interlinked. So actually we know care leavers are in this group that are most likely to kind of have some of the adverse outcomes, and so digital exclusion was
we know this, don't we? We knew this before. This is just sort of amplified that. Before we come down to solutions and stuff, I am thrilled here to be able to introduce someone from Estonia. Now, Estonia is a country that took this bull by the horns and went digital first like that. Mario, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, is it Mandmar?
Yes, almost.
Oh, go on. say it. Tell me how I should be saying it.
Oh, you were perfect.
Okay, tell me what happens in Estonia with this group of young people, care leavers specifically. Is this a group that you address independently?
Well, thank you for asking to take part. It's my honor, and I apologize for my bad English. It's not my mother tongue, so I'm sorry if I.
My Estonian, I can assure you.
I have to say that my field of expertise are more people who are mentally disabled. We also provide services for young people who have psychiatric disabilities or mentally disabled. But I have to say that if we talk about our country's policy, we do not address specific target groups. If I hear what you're talking, then I would come to back. That I think it was in your conclusion that you need this digital culture, to change of digital culture. I have to say that it didn't go like that for Estonia. We started in 1996 when our government decided that after breaking free from Soviet Union, we had to find our own path. And at that time, everything was, the IT was like a new wave. So we choose that, and we had a very specific whole country policy. We called it Tiger Leap. And the aim of Tiger Leap was to engage everybody, despite of the age or belonging to any social group, to engage them into internet services. And I have to say that we started, it was our luck that we started with like real services, not fun and Facebook. Stuff like that wasn't developed in that area. But we started with real services like banking, like e-health services. And that was, and our first cabinet meeting, government cabinet meeting was 11 years ago already, full digital. So we started to show people that e-services are something real, what you can provide through what you can really organize your life, communicate with local authority or government. So it was like seriousness in internet, not just fun and games. And that's why if you look latest reports about Estonia's attitude toward internet, we trust it 99%. We do our elections because we trust the net, and issues like Mark Zuckerberg being some type of lizard doesn't bother us. We don't use them Facebook, but we don't lose trust in internet per se, because we know that we do our dealings, we pay our taxes, we make our tax reports. And I think what was really essential in that sense was that every Estonian citizen got electronic ID. So I have a digital signature, which legal, and I can sign and do my official dealings with government and other companies wherever I stay in the world. I just need an internet, and that works. And I think this digital signature was also one very important cornerstone to bring people more in internet, to get engaged. And if we talk about social services and connections between clients and social services, it has been already there like for 10 years. Because I really can manage my pensions and my social welfare just with this little plastic ID card and digital signature. So I think that has been the success of our digital inclusion.
The way I understand it, for instance, Estonian citizens hold their own data. Yeah, they decide who can get access to share their data about health and social care, for instance. It's a complete a different approach to it than we do. But Mario, what do you do, unless of course there are no people in Estonia that are poor or marginalized? How do you make sure that people that don't have the resources can get access to all that? Because like here, we're talking banking, health, social care, discounts on power, for instance, that you can only get if you go online. What did you do in Estonia, Mario, to include people
Well, as I mentioned, this Tiger Lead project, the first, and I think it was the most important thing in that program, was that we made a free access internet points all over Estonia. We said that in every library there should be free internet access to whoever comes there. And it was like 1996. There was no iPhones or smartphones or tablets, right? So our government started to bring people in a very early stages, and we got. Well, I worked at that time in with prisons and probation services, and I remember that we got plenty of money from government to buy all those computers and to build up real infrastructure so that we would be connected, and that has been a priority for our government since nowadays. So it's quite easy to get access to internet. It's free, mostly in Estonia, well, I don't know about phones and tablets. They cost as they cost, and someone says that they are very expensive in Estonia. But and if I look at my clients who are certainly from poorer social classes, they all have iPhones or smartphones, so they have access. But I think it's because all.
Oh, we've lost your sound, Mario. Is it only me that's lost Mario's sound?
No, it is gone.
Mario, your sound is gone. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Hold on while we sort that out. Let me just, that's really fascinating, because the question I would have asked Mario next is, do Estonians regard digital access as a human right? Is it enshrined as a right? Should it be here? And what would that look like? I don't know if anybody wants to pick that up. I think, Mario, you're still...
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, fab. Yeah.
Well, it's not in our constitution, but I think that 100% Estonians consider it a human right. And if there are clients coming to our residential units, they ask, do you have internet? And if I don't have it, they leave. It's like, you don't have basic stuff. How can you manage your care homes? Yeah. So yeah, it's and in our government papers, if they create different e-services, they write it down that this is your basic right to have free internet access, but it's not written in our constitution. It's
so. Doesn't need to be. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that.
It's obvious to everybody. So.
David McNeil, that's an interesting challenge, isn't it, when you compare and contrast with Scotland? What would we have to change? Is it about the culture of people, or is it about, I mean, as I understand it, in Estonia, it was the election of a new prime minister who just came in and said, we're doing this, and we're doing this within 18 months, so it's getting done now. Could we do with that here, David McNeil?
Yeah, I suppose the Estonia, there was a wholehearted decision to go invest in infrastructure investment being in digital, not in roads or wherever your traditional exit. So there was a big choice here that we've not made here.
So and Mario, also, has Mario got terrible roads then and really good internet? I tell you, my roads in Glasgow leave a bit to be desired.
And what I was mentioning about the ID, all the government, this is an ID. You have to interact with the government in a digital way, and I think there's a long way for us to go around digital public services being accessible in Scotland and well designed. But I suppose it's that thing about we've too often assumed that people do have digital access, and the rights kind of focus. I mean, I think when it was mentioned earlier about it really brings it into focus when digital on its own as a right seems a bit of a strange thing, but actually, when you're kind of have a stay at home, when you're staying at home, you can't access your other rights. It's prevent your lack of connection. It's preventing you accessing education. So digital is an enabler, and And I think there's been an assumption that because we've had libraries, because we've had free Wi-Fi in town centres, that there's a safety net, and the pandemic's taken that safety net away.
Okay, thank you. Now I know that Kenny wants to come in, but Olivia, can I bring you in first?
Sure, I'll be quick. I noticed, I hear this example. Thank you, Mario, for sharing. It's really inspiring. And maybe we kind of think, oh, I wish we had done this, or I wish we could do this now. And I kind of think of an example of how we can, in everyday life, kind of take a little bit of learning from this. And it's something I notice in this really sort of toxic sentence or sentiment of when lockdown is over or when things go back to normal. And I think that tech is forever, and tech is a long-term, forever kind of investment. And if we can see the Zoom calls that we have with young people, or buying a young person a Nintendo Switch as being a long-term investment into their future, to helping them understand tech and to connecting with them around that, it can take away this idea of, I can't wait for Zoom to be over for us to then connect in person again, because I think these two things are going to go hand in hand in the future.
Thank you. Now, Kenny and Autumn both want to come in here. Please wave your hands at me or message me or something if you want in, but Kenny.
Just very briefly, I think that David's point that is or the assumption of digital connection being a right, it's actually, if it stops you accessing your right, then it's got to be a right. That, obviously in itself, tech's just a vehicle to access rights. But if it's something there that prevents people, and what we're seeing at the moment is young people's rights being denied them because they're disconnected, they're isolated, they're structurally marginalised, then that gets in the way of the right. So then it becomes a right. And it's go back to one of the quotes that we shared in the slide from one of the through care workers. And it's about that thing about having it hardwired into facilities. Young people actually choosing move on accommodation on the basis that it's already got plumbed in Wi-Fi. Now, one of the things that we would probably want to think about in the first instance, and I'll use the word council housing because that's what I grew up with, but we call it social housing. But any public housing that's available has to be hardwired and plumbed in for the outset as part of your rent money or part of your council tax money or whatever. That's where we need to begin to think about that being part of an infrastructure issue.
Okay, thank you. Autumn, you wanted to come in, and then I'm going to pick up some of the contributions from listeners.
Brilliant. Just quickly, I wanted to pick up on something that Olivia and Mary and Megan touched on, which was about, the bit about confidence and connection, and how we also need to engage with young people. So in Europe, we talk about social pedagogy a lot, about this idea of social workers educating young people and having critical conversations about their life in a relationship-based way. So what Olivia was saying about, what are young people doing online? What are they, how are they engaging? How meaningful or helpful is it? And what are they actually spending their time doing? And is that helpful for them? And again, that's what caring parents would do. If you were aware that your young person was spending a lot of time on WhatsApp and seemed upset every time they got off the phone, you would be saying, what's going on? What are people saying on there that's making you upset? And I think it's that, that, as Mary was saying, that kind of rights-based, person-centered, young person-centered approach where, technology and communicating online is part of life, and it's how we maintain relationships now. And if we as adults don't understand that and don't engage with that world, we're missing out on so much. And I've just completed another bit of research, which will be published soon, about mental health and social media and care experienced people. And it's saying very clearly, the young people are saying, this is so important to me. It's helpful for my mental health. That sometimes I get sent weird images, or people do things, or I see things that are bad, but also there's all these other good things. But workers are risk averse sometimes and don't acknowledge how much this means in my life, and should ask me about it, should engage with me about that. So I just want to highlight, I think those were really good points that are part of the digital inclusion story that we don't want to miss.
I was also struck by your research calling into question the corporate parenting, that it ought to be more about parenting than the corporate, because we've heard about organizations that kind of, for me, seem to arbitrarily decide that you can't use Zoom, or you can't use this technology or that technology, putting up barriers. Now, let me play in some of what we're hearing from people. We have Forrest Templeton here saying, very short and sweet, sounds like it needs to be a culture of government. I'd like to come back to that. Where does this rest? You know, are we atomizing this in a way that's helpful to government, or should we just land it back at them and say we want to be digital a nation? There's another point here, and this is really interesting, from Leena Prasad, who I don't know if you're in India, Leena, but you're saying it's sad and the situation is even worse in India. How do you get governments to actually realize the criticality of this and get them to respond to the urgency? Now, I don't know whether maybe Linda or Mary or Megan, do you want to pick that up? You know, your local government, do you need, as in Estonia, somebody at the centre to say, no mucking around now, we've had it with this is happening?
I think there needs to be something that's always at the forefront of our minds. In Aberdeen, we're currently trying to put a bid in that when a young person has an Aberdeen City Council tenancy, that Wi-Fi comes as a part of that. That is something that we're currently in the process of doing, and it shouldn't be down to just us as people fighting for that. It should be about, as you say, a government bound across the board thing, and not just down to a postcode lottery, because unfortunately that's what's going to end up being. For example, if we're successful, that means that our Aberdeen City Council tenants will get Wi-Fi. What does that mean for the private tenants? What does that mean for the tenants in Aberdeenshire? How can we ensure this is fair to all care leavers and not just the ones who have the right people in the right place?
Yeah. And, you know, there's an issue here as well. Kenny mentioned it about housing. I read recently, I mean, literally a couple of days ago, that a housing association is going to be hardwiring this in. You know, local government, Linda, can you do more to kind of like get that stuff moving, or do you need this to come down from the top? I don't mean the top, literally, obviously, but...
You know, Highland Council are really at the forefront of chasing it, because, you know, we have got so many people who just can't access any digital media in the areas that they're in. And if, you know, when I look at all the reports, and when I was looking at the reports for today, there's reports every couple of weeks about digital access and how we actually get it. And you know, there's even, you know, simple things like some of our areas don't even have a telephone, let alone digital. And BT wants to take away all the telephone boxes, but that's literally all there is. So, you know, there's that arguments and that debate's going on all the time. So certainly in our area, it's being fought on a daily basis, but I do think it needs to come from not just the Scottish Government, from the UK Government. You know, there's lots of funding coming into it, but there's not enough, and it's not quick enough to get it around the whole area.
Thank you so much. There's a really interesting point here, and Olivia touched on it. This isn't just about hardware and software and the ability to afford that and get it. There's an assumption often made that because you're a young person, you know your way around this stuff and you can do it all like that, right? So there's a real issue here about digital literacy. How do we provide that kind of support, teaching? Is it peer support better than something formal? Olivia, how would you like to see it gone about?
Well, this is a big reason this is a reason why I really got back involved with the Champions Board when lockdown hit. I had moved to Berlin and I was there for a year and was doing work actually in tech here. I started a tech company with a friend of mine, which plummeted because of lockdown, and realized that a lot of the young people I was working with were basically, you know, these relationships were carefully carved, and we carefully grew trust with these young people. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's all gone back to square one. And I thought I should call this young person that I know, but it's not guaranteed that they have WhatsApp to have data, and this mother is not going to have time to have a phone call with me. Even when I'm with her, there's, you know, 4 of her kids are running around. It's hard enough to have a conversation. So it really gave me motivation and the drive to see how important this is. I think that we all possibly know how poor the numbers for education are for care experienced young people, but they do tend to turn back to education in their older age, which I think is really interesting and important. So I actually wrote to Creative Scotland for their open application for funding, and suggested doing a mentorship program for care experienced young people, led by myself remotely, working through a creative endeavor for ourselves. So I will also join them, and we'll have a few weeks to think about it. We'll maybe be like, somebody wants to teach themselves a language, somebody wants to be a YouTuber, which is very common within young people just now, start a blog, be a photographer, and together we'll work together on having a budget on what tech you need to buy, and working together. And what I really think is going to be useful about this is the idea that growing some sort of stamina for online work. It takes a lot of time to get used to being in front of a computer, and if that can be done through a video game or watching YouTube videos is perfect. That sounds ideal. So this is going to be rolling out very soon this year, and Creative Scotland love the idea. I'm working with CELCIS and the Champions Board to help make this happen, and I think this is the future of this kind of education. I think, yeah, there are lots of great online courses that's good for young people with a bit of, you know, spirit who can do this on their own. But if we can do it together, let's do it together. So I really feel like my long-term plan is to help empower older young people, kind of my age, mid-20s, you know, 18 above, parents, people who are working, and people, young people who have been given amazing opportunities through the Champions Board, through CELCIS, through Life Changes Trust, to have a bit of know-how, but also with the experience. And I think the future of this care campaigning, this whole world that we're in, is that us young people start to lead the way with technology. And I really see this as like my 5-year plan.
It sounds absolutely spot on, and what you're describing is digital literacy kind of skills without calling it that, making it practical. Mary, you wanted to come in.
Well, first of all, I'm so glad that Olivia went first there, because she completely proves what I'm just about to say, and that is the importance of actually talking to young people as part of this when we're coming up with these solutions. So the research goes some way to explaining the need for national policy responses to this, but there are local solutions in there that need to be heard as well as part of that. So a sort of cookie cutter rollout of digital literacy is not the way to go. You know, young people we need to hear their voices through this, create opportunities to work alongside them, and have them design along with, you know, IT experts, if they're not like Olivia and an expert themselves, to actually develop the solutions to this. So I'd really like to see more input from champions boards, as well as other youth organisations such as Young Scot and national organisations like that too.
Thank you so much, because I mean, I suppose that, you know, could there also be a national programme then that's built to promote this direction of travel? David McNeill.
I think so. I think there's the national and local together is really important, because actually this needs to be embedded just as part of what we do on your kind of pathway out of care. That it just needs to be factored into what happens as through your journey, rather than seeing as something big and new and different and additional. When we create a really big digital program, it is just a fundamental part of what goes on. Now that necessarily doesn't happen just now, and again, there's other things that need to happen about being embedded, like in housing and in social housing, that connectivity is just provided for free or affordable. So,
but maybe that has to be centrally mandated, does it?
I think some of that. I think there's a bit about regulation. I think there's a bit about money that needs to be found from somewhere, because this is not cheap by a kind of long way. And then there's a bit about everybody, whether you're a voluntary organisation, local authority, anybody working with groups that are digitally excluded. taking your own responsibility to equip people with the skills, and doing what you can around connectivity and kit as well.
I mean, Mario, in Estonia, did you pursue the national local kind of twin track route into this? Or for you, did the national kind of make the rest of it happen?
We started with a national program. This Tiger Leap was a whole Estonian program, and I think it was about 10 years when local governments tried to do something different, tried to have their own way. But if we consider the investments, what you have to do to keep up your infrastructure, and also engage all those services so that you would really get the effort, maximum effort out from e-services, then our government changed the policy and they went to help local authorities and made actually the infrastructure for them and paid for it. So it has been very, very much supported by government programs, policies, financing, growing the literacy. So it has been kind of governmental policy to do it way. And actually, I have to say that one more thing, where the right-wing party in Estonia, which said that they don't believe in e-elections, they were not elected because they dared to insult our e-services.
So in fact, this can work on all sorts of levels. Kenny and Autumn, I was interested by your, you talk about an assumption of entitlement. Explain to me what that means, because, somebody that's not embedded in this world, what do we mean by assumption of entitlement here?
The assumption of entitlement principle is one that is one of the key principles in the Scottish Care Weavers Covenant, which is an alliance of organisations that drew up this covenant about 5 years ago to forward care weavers' rights. And I suppose the point about the assumption of entitlement is that rather than saying, well, why should they get it? It turns it on its head and it says, well, they're our kids, and it gets to the heart of these are the state have taken responsibility for children. So what you would do 9 times out of 10 for your own kids is the default position is okay, yeah, it's what we would do for our kids. So that assumption of entitlement is there rather than young people having to argue the toss, having to fight for the rights, having to fight for services. They're the state's children, therefore they must be provided with it. That's the assumption of entitlement.
So what needs to happen now then to make that a reality? We've got to move. We see so much rhetoric. It's got to be translated into reality. Yep. Autumn.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yes, I totally agree with that. And I think it's still, I'm not an expert about the relationships between central government and local government. I still think something's going wrong, because if you have Aberdeen saying we're going down this road, we're going to make this happen because we see it as a local priority, and you have Highland doing all these wonderful things, but other local authorities aren't, that's just not fair. That's not right. So it seems like it has to come from the top somehow to say, well, there's some things you can decide locally whether you want or you don't, or how you want them, but there are other things that actually we have to just do because they're that important. And it strikes me that this is one of those things. So I don't know, we all have to go home and write to our MSPs and get involved in whatever ways other political ways we can to keep banging home this message. And hope that it gets heard.
And given that we're coming up to an election where we're trying to decide whether we should have an election or not because of people turning out to polls, you would maybe imagine that this was an excuse for putting the foot down on this front. But I'm conscious that we've got 15 minutes to go. There is so much ground we could cover here, but I want to play in that. I managed to delete a message by accident from someone who was basically saying about the barriers that, in his school, I think it was that you can use Chromebook, but there's real, again, it's back to this inequity that some people can and others can't. Let me read something here from Forrest Templeton. saying Megan's point about preference and choice for young people is important. In my role as a CRO, I'm often in the position of making contact with young people I have no relationship with. Some are curious and want to see who they're speaking with, others not, and prefer a phone call. One interesting and productive tool I discovered was using text. Many young people use text, sometimes more than speech. It has many advantages and allows young people opportunities to respond in their own time and to reflect on the questions being asked without feeling the pressure to deliver a response straight away. The difficult bit as an older person with clumsy fingers is responding quick enough. Good on you, Forrest Templeton. So I think that picks up your point, Olivia, about working with young, well, everybody's made it. Work with them. Don't just tell them how you can do it or how you expect them to do it. Let me pick up, can I, Sue Willing, because you're not on the screen in front of me, I'm afraid I haven't been able to play you in quite as much as I should have. Sue, do you want to respond to what you've heard, you know, from the Aberdeenshire Council point of view?
Yes, I mean, I think it's really interesting what Megan's saying, and it's not something I have to say that we've thought about in our council, but what I feel we have been doing is, you know, the Through Care team itself has been trying to respond in flexible ways, but maybe it's time to take things back to the corporate parenting heads group and raise this kind of issue, because it is really important for young people to be able to have this kind of access. And it's been done before. I mean, Kenny, we looked at all of this stuff about exemption from council tax, and that was sort of brought up through CELCIS and through staff and so on. Eventually that has become a thing the Scottish Government has agreed to. So maybe through here today, you know, this can move on and be taken back to government. And similarly in our little neck of the woods, we need to go back to our corporate parenting people and start looking at what we can do locally as well. And I think that's, you know, that would be a start anyway, but maybe there's also the national level to look at and how it goes from here too.
Caroline Welsh has posted a message saying, very interesting points made earlier about evolving rights culture of digital access for young people. Anyone aware of the views of the Children's Commissioner for Scotland on this point? So, you know, folk are looking to kind of knock it up the line instead of it always being kicked down into local communities where there can be such diversity. Yes, Autumn.
I have heard that they've made a recent new appointment at the Commissioner's office to do with young people in the digital world. So I think they're trying to get on that bandwagon. But the Children's Commissioner down in England, obviously she'll be going soon, and they've elected someone else. But the previous one wrote a fantastic report in 2017 talking about care experienced people and people in the care system and digital access. And I think it's quite a groundbreaking report. And she highlights in that a really interesting project in Durham, where they trained care experienced young people to be digital leaders and train other young people. And I know Young Scott have been doing some of that kind of work, not specifically for care experienced young people, but I think there are models around. Olivia's work sounds fantastic, and it would be great to see more of those kind of projects led by young people, supporting other young people, because young people are more credible because they live in this world in a different way. So being able to support each other, I think it's kind of like the conversations about drugs and sex. Like if your mom tells you about it, you know, you're like, okay, yeah. But if another young person talks to you about it, there's a different kind of hearing that goes on in that. So I think that's really interesting.
I think that fits with Joe Craig. Thank you so much, Joe. Joe's is the message I accidentally deleted. Basically saying allowing access to social media platforms is a big one. He's a secondary school teacher, and the school's lucky enough to be able to provide a Chromebook to every pupil. We're able to set these to be able to access some services like YouTube, Netflix, though for safeguarding reasons, we can't just allow access to others like Facebook. Well, maybe we can come back to that, but we probably don't have time. What's been irritating to hear recently is that devices given out to disadvantaged young people in other areas of the country are not able to access YouTube, a resource which many teachers will be using rightly to provide the best remote learning they can. I mean, it strikes me as, frankly, I mean, David, I've got to come back to you on this. Can we tolerate this kind of inequity across our country that means that by dint of where you live, you may or may not get taught?
Yeah, it's a real challenge, and I think on that one on restrictions, I think the public sector is very risk averse, and there's good reasons for wanting to protect young children, young people, but not to the extent that actually the preferred way is to put in quality education and have minimal restrictions, because if you've ever worked with young people, they'll know how to get around the restrictions eventually. So let's focus on providing decent education and not, and again, on those devices that are provided to disadvantaged or vulnerable people, why should that be different? Why should they be different to what a parent would go out and buy a device for you anyway? Why should we feel to wrap people in cotton wool? So yeah.
I mean, we've got 9 minutes to go. We could do with another 9 hours of this. But Kenny and Autumn, your report, your research basically showed that there is a dearth of research. We don't know what is actually going on out there. Is that true, Autumn?
I think there's a lot of really useful reports that have been done by organizations, but I think it's been a long time since we had a really large national study of care leavers in Scotland, a big cohort study. And it's important because policy and legislation and practice have changed massively in that time. So we really do need to have a closer look, not just at this area, but at a range of things to do with young people's outcomes in Scotland, partly to understand the direction of travel. Is some of this beginning to make a difference or not? And if not, why not? And how have wider changes in society and the culture impacted on young people too? So there are bits of research and there's lots of stuff that we can understand, but I think in terms of a larger population study, I think there really is a need for that in Scotland, to have a better evidence base. And too often we rely on English studies, and the situation here is different, and it's become much different over recent years as policies have diverged.
And Kenny, as you say in your report, we're not hearing from the most excluded because they are the most excluded. We've got to get to them, have we not?
Absolutely, and we can do that, but we need to get, I've got to avoid the cliche, we need to get in with the kids and try to stop, as we were saying earlier, we need to find the platforms that suit their means of communication. We constantly talk about young people that are hard to reach, and we put the onus on them. We other them by saying, oh, we struggle to. Actually, we need to think about our own skills and our own approaches. Maybe it's our deficit rather than their ability to connect with us. Young people want to connect. Young people are hardwired to connect. They like being part of the adult world. We just need to find a way in which we include them better, and we need to change that.
And that
any youth worker worth their salt will tell you can't impose your agenda on young people. You need to go with them.
I think I've got Mary and Olivia that want to come in, but I very much want to go back to Mario as well. Mary, we've got a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that organisations shouldn't be afraid of making some mistakes around that stuff, or even learning from their experiences. I mean, we obviously made a lot of awards here, but we also know that it scratches the surface and that there were some young people who maybe struggled to fill in the form. So we've changed our practice with that. We offer telephone applications to go through that with a young person, to receive things from phones that are not smartphones, and really you just need to change your practice as you go. Don't be too worried about making some mistakes along the way.
Have you got a request on TikTok yet with all that?
I'd struggle with that one.
Olivia, you wanted to come in? No, okay. Mario, I heard very clearly, I think, from you that you haven't kind of broken this down into, necessarily looking at the needs of young care leavers, young people who are leaving care, that you're doing this across Estonian society for everyone. Do you think if we get this right in Scotland for this group of young people, it would benefit more widely?
Yeah, sure, of course. I mean, because young people also use services which other people use too. I mean, they can be a small test group, and then you have like spillover effect. And while young people are more agile and they learn quicker, that would be really good testing group for that. So I'm sure that it will affect all the other services too. And
Okay,
yeah,
I was going to ask you, do you have any tips on what Scotland should do to embed a national digital approach for Scotland? Would this be a good place to start?
Well, I should talk to our new Prime Minister and ask your Prime Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, to come to visit us, and they could talk about it.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to contribute? And now we've got 4 minutes left before we run out of time. Olivia.
I think I have the answer to your question, or at least some kind of answer. We kind of touched on this idea that, and it comes up sometimes with groups of people, for example, just young people who are maybe in poverty, or young people who are young carers. There's often a bit of overlap there. You know, they can't necessarily maybe access the same things, and often I feel a sense of guilt where I'm supporting one young person and I can see another who would also need support, but it's not our remit. Do we have the funds to also support this young person? But I also almost have memorized all of the poor outcomes of these young people, and we really are kind of the bottom of the barrel. And I see this kind of like transformation happening within my lifetime, where these young people are so empowered and so trusted and well, and learn so much through this process of coming through these kind of calls and these kind of conversations, where we say, hey, you tell us what we need to do and use your experience. And I feel like there is going to be an army of really amazing, intelligent, like young people who are going to also support the next generation. So I have so much positivity for what's going to happen. And even lockdown and COVID, I feel like it's contributing, not taking away from the good stuff that we're doing.
Yeah, and I mean, here's Kate Myers saying the digital exclusion. Why did it take a pandemic to highlight such an important need? But what you're saying is it's actually, we knew. This has just underlined it. David McNeil, a couple of days ago, the Scottish Government announced a target to, quote, end digital exclusion in the next parliamentary term. Is that doable?
Yeah, I think the Social Renewal Advisory Board had kind of, that's a, you know, in terms of social actions we want to take, that was what everybody came to as one of the kind of top actions. So it's a key priority. It's possible. It will require a lot of money, a lot of commitment. I think, and it's a role for everybody, you know, to address what was brought up in the research at the start. It's not just about getting people a connection, not just about a device. It's about the confidence and skills, and everybody's got a role to play in those dimensions.
And that's the confidence and skills of the corporate parent as well as the looked after or the person leaving care. Mario, I think you wanted to come in there. Did you? Did you want to make any points? No. This was about Scotland announcing that this was going to be a target. And so maybe we'll be like Estonia very soon. We are in the last minute of this fantastic discussion. I think this is so important. I'd like to thank everyone for contributing. I'm sorry if Sue, you've been kind of like, you know, because you're not in Viz, perhaps not involved as much as you should be, but I'd like to keep these conversations going. I'm going to be following this really closely. I'm only a journalist, but I am utterly convinced that this is a human right and that we all ought to have it.